All right, if you're a sustainability analyst, I'm sure you know this feeling all too well. You are just flooded with data, right? But the thing is, raw numbers can be, well, they can be incredibly deceptive. You might see a company's carbon emissions go up, but does that actually mean its performance is getting worse? Not always. Today, we're diving into the one technique that is absolutely essential for separating the signal from the noise. It's called normalization, and it's the real key to unlocking the true story behind all that ESG data. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at why raw data can lead us down the wrong path. Then, we'll get into what normalization actually is and how it gives us that missing context. After that, we'll unpack the analyst's toolkit, basically when and how you should use it. Then, we'll walk through 4 quick examples to really see it in action, and finally, we'll tie it all back to making smarter, better strategic decisions. Okay, let's start with the problem itself. In sustainability analysis, just like in finance, looking at a single absolute number without any context, it's a recipe for getting things wrong. It's kind of like finding one single puzzle piece and then trying to describe the whole picture. It's such a common trap because those big numbers feel so solid, but they often hide what's really going on with performance. So think about this for a second. You see a headline metric, and it says a company's water usage shot up by 50% in just 1 year. What's your gut reaction? For a lot of people, it's that the company's getting wasteful, less efficient, and that its environmental performance is just tanking. But is that really the right conclusion to jump to? I mean, look at these numbers. They're pretty stark. In year 1, the company's using 20 million cubic meters of water. The next year, it jumps to 30 million. That is a massive 10 million cubic meter increase. On paper, this just looks bad. It's exactly the kind of raw number that would set off alarm bells in an ESG model or a sustainability report. But here is the absolute key. This number, this single piece of data, is almost meaningless by itself. We know what happened, water use went up, but we have no idea why. We don't know how efficiently it happened. Is the company less efficient or is it growing? Maybe it's expanding into a new product line that just uses more water. Without that context, we're just guessing, and you could end up unfairly punishing a growing company or, even worse, overlooking a real problem in a shrinking one. And that brings us right to the solution. The tool that gives us that missing context, the thing that lets us make real, meaningful comparisons, is normalization. It's a pretty simple idea, but its power in sustainability analysis, you just can't overstate it. This is how you turn raw, noisy data into actual insight. So what is it exactly? Well, the official definition calls it a process of adjusting data to make it more useful for analysis. In the real world, this usually means creating simple ratios. We're creating what are often called intensity metrics. You know, things like carbon emissions per $1 million in revenue or water use per widget produced. These intensity metrics, they are the absolute foundation of good sustainability analysis. And this right here perfectly sums up the difference. Absolute data tells you what happened. Emissions went up. Normalized data tells you how efficiently it happened. See, absolute data can be so misleading for investors and analysts, but normalized data is the great equalizer. It accounts for a company's size and lets you make those vital comparisons, peer-to-peer and year-over-year, that you have to have for any kind of fundamental analysis. Okay, so let's get practical. Knowing what normalization is one thing. Knowing when and how to actually do it, well, that's what separates a good analyst from a great one. And luckily, there's a pretty straightforward way to think about it. Before you start normalizing any data, just ask yourself these 3 simple questions. First off, is it already a ratio? Things like percentages or other ratios, you don't need to normalize them again. Second, is the absolute number the most important thing? Think about greenhouse gas emissions being measured against a strict regulatory cap. In that case, yeah, the absolute number of tons is what matters. But if the answer is no, you probably need to normalize. And third, if you're looking at a bunch of companies in the same industry, does their performance vary a lot? If it does, normalization is going to create that common ground and make your comparisons way more insightful. So you've decided to normalize. The next and really critical choice is your divisor, what we call the normalizer. You've basically got 2 main options here. First, there are financial metrics, like revenue or EBITDA. These are great for measuring eco-efficiency, and they're usually easy to find. The downside is they can get thrown off by things like inflation or currency swings, which can hide what's really happening in the operations. The second, and often more powerful choice, is activity metrics. These measure something physical, like units produced, or the square footage of a store. They give you a much clearer picture of operational efficiency. Now, the trick has always been finding consistent activity metrics across an industry, And this is where the SASB standards are just invaluable. They provide industry-specific metrics designed to be the most relevant drivers of impact, creating a true apples-to-apples way to compare companies. Okay, enough theory. Let's make this really concrete. We're going to run through 4 quick examples from the source material, and you'll see how using the right normalizer doesn't just change the analysis a little bit, it can completely flip the entire story. So let's go back to our first example, right? That scary 50% jump in water use. But now let's add in a key activity metric, the number of product cases they produced. Turns out, production also went up by 50%, from 500,000 cases to 750,000. And when we do the simple math, divide the water used by the cases produced, the story does a complete 180. In year 1, the company used 40 cubic meters of water for every case. And in year 2, it also used 40 cubic meters per case. Its efficiency didn't get worse at all. It stayed exactly the same. The company just grew. The raw data made it look like there was a problem. The normalized data shows us they were scaling efficiently. For an analyst, the whole story changes from flagging a water risk to confirming a successful growth strategy. All right, let's look at a peer comparison. We've got 2 grocery chains. At first glance, Grocer B has slightly higher emissions from its refrigerants. But look at the size of their operations. Grocer B is way bigger, with 18 million square meters of retail space compared to Grocer A's 15 million. So who's actually more efficient? When we normalize those emissions by their retail area, the whole picture flips. Grocer B, the company with the higher absolute emissions, is actually the more efficient one. It only emits 0.057 tons for every million square meters, while Grocer A is at 0.067. So the bigger company looked worse at first, but normalization shows it's the operational leader. And analysts might now see Grocer B in a much better light, as a company with stronger management and lower climate risk. And here's another great example. Company B uses double the energy of Company A, 20,000 gigajoules versus 10,000. But again, you have to look at the scale. Company B's production space is 2.5 times larger. Once we normalize by that production space, it turns out Company B is actually the more efficient operator. It uses just 0.008 gigajoules per square meter, while Company A uses 0.010. That's a huge signal that they have better control over a major operational cost, which could mean stronger profits down the road. And for our last example, let's look at the power of a really specific SASB activity metric. For a telecom company, normalizing their energy used by revenue, it doesn't really capture their core business. The SASB standard gives us the perfect metric, network traffic measured in petabytes. So you divide the 36,000 gigajoules of energy by 10,000 petabytes of traffic, and you get this incredibly insightful metric, 3.6 gigajoules per petabyte. Now, that is the kind of metric that lets you do a precise, meaningful comparison of efficiency across the entire telecom industry. So, we've seen how normalization works. Now let's just zoom out and connect this all back to the big picture. Why does this really matter? It matters because normalized data is the bedrock of good comparative analysis, and that analysis is what drives smart financial decisions. At the end of the day, normalization unlocks 3 critical ways to compare things. First, you can analyze your own company's performance over time. This lets you track if you're actually hitting your efficiency goals. Second, you can benchmark against your peers. This tells you where you stand in the industry. Are you a leader or a laggard? And that answer directly impacts how investors see your company. And third, you can evaluate your performance against industry benchmarks and targets, like science-based targets. This is so crucial for valuation because it helps you figure out if a company is ready for a net zero future or if it's exposed to some serious risk. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? We start with these isolated, maybe even misleading data points. Then, through the simple but really powerful process of normalization, we create meaningful comparisons. And those comparisons aren't just for some report, they become essential pieces of a bigger, fundamental analysis of a company's performance, its risks, and its real long-term value. So, the next time you're looking at a raw ESG number, just stop. Don't take it at face value. Ask yourself, what's the right way to normalize this? What's the context I'm missing? Because once you move past those absolute numbers and start thinking in terms of ratios and intensity, that's when you can start to uncover the real story. Now that you can truly compare the data, what story is it going to tell you?